Conquering a city is easy, but holding on to it, even emperors rarely manage that. But he did. He didn't just break down gates, he didn't just climb over walls, he marched straight into the heart of an era. And there, with a will that could bend centuries, he changed the course of history. Some say you can still hear the cannons echo over Topkapi hills. Some feel the silence of a young ruler in the stones of Hagia Sophia. Because that day, Istanbul wasn't just taken. That day, Istanbul was convinced he was the child of a dream. But he didn't write that dream on the edge of his sword. He carved it deep into his mind. He didn't destroy to conquer. He made them kneel so he could understand. That's why when his name is spoken, it's not just soldiers who look up. Philosophers do too. 1453 is more than a date. It's when one age closed its gates and the key to the next was driven into the earth. And that key, it's still there. If you don't listen to the minarets of Istanbul today, but to the wind instead, it'll whisper to you the words of a young sultan. Either I take Istanbul or it takes me. The city he conquered was never just a capital. Istanbul was a mystery dreamt by emperors, and he unlocked that mystery at 18. Today, maybe ships don't sail over land, but dreams still follow in his path. The walls may be restored, but his decision? Still unbroken, and the shadow of his sword still lingers over Istanbul. Because some victories end, but some live on. A boy barely old enough to lose all his baby teeth sits in the throne room. In the heavy silence of the chamber, the sound of grown men kneeling echoes. The power of an empire is being handed over to a child. That child is Sultan Mehmed, just 12 years old. But his eyes were calm, far too calm for his age. Maybe he was young, but something ancient looked out from behind those eyes. Because he was the son of Sultan Murad II. In the tense days of the empire, his father had stepped aside and placed him on the throne. It wasn't a game, it was a test. Inside the palace, storms were brewing. The statesmen weren't convinced. A child couldn't rule, not with danger at the gates. The crusaders were threatening from outside, and indecisive viziers stirred unrest from within. The throne was shaking. Then the message came to Edirne. The enemy was getting close. The army was restless. The viziers were pushing hard, and everyone was questioning the authority of this boy. This was the exact moment the Stoics talk about. Don't let what's out of your control destroy you. Mehmed didn't try to control events. He controlled his response, and he wrote a letter to his father. These words would echo through history. If you are the Sultan, then come and lead your army. But if I am the Sultan, then I order you, take command of your army. You can hear Epictetus in that line. If you know what's right for you, don't be afraid to say it. Mehmed demanded what was his, not with anger, not with panic, but with clarity, with composure, with conviction. Murad saw his son's resolve and returned. He took command. He led the army to victory. Mehmed gave the throne back to his father, and from that day on, no one ever mocked his youth again. He would return. One day he would conquer Istanbul. But not yet. Years passed. Away from the throne, Mehmed stayed quiet, but alert. He studied. He learned Latin. He dove into politics. He explored war strategies. He sharpened his mind. Because as the Stoics say, a good leader prepares long before he leads. Through all this time, he never held a grudge. He didn't see being pushed away as a humiliation. He thought like a Stoic. Taking the throne wasn't in my control, but being ready when it came back, that was. And one day, it did. Murad died. Mehmed ascended the throne again. But this time, he wasn't a child. He was a commander, a ruler, a man of ideas. That day, the empire didn't just gain a sultan, it gained a mindset. one of patience, preparation, and inner strength. So now the question is, where are you in this story? What opportunities have you stepped back from, saying, "I'm not ready yet"? And when have you looked fate in the eye and said, "My time has come"? In the next episode, we move to the moment of truth at the gates of Constantinople. Are the chains in your way real, or are they only in your mind? The Golden Horn was like a giant seal, chained shut, impossible to enter. It was one of Byzantium's strongest defenses. And outside, the Ottoman fleet waited, silent, useless. The galleys, built over months with great effort, now seemed completely worthless. This was the breaking point of a typical siege, but what shattered that typical moment was a single radical idea: to move the ships overland. What made Mehmet truly powerful was his refusal to be discouraged by obstacles. He knew what the Stoics always said: focus on what you can control and solve the rest with your mind. Who came up with the idea? Historians debated. Some say Zaanos Pasha, some say Mehmet himself. But the truth is, it doesn't matter who thought of it. What mattered was who dared to do it. And that kind of madness was what changed the fate of Istanbul. Epictetus once said, "External things can't harm us. What matters is how we see them and how we react." Mehmet didn't see the barriers as threats. He saw them as opportunities. Today, the land stretching from Taksim to the hills of Pera feels ordinary. But back then, it was steep, muddy, and difficult even for marching troops, let alone dragging ships. Still, Mehmet had made his decision. He wasn't just attacking a city. He was attacking what people believed was possible. Logs were shaped into rolling cylinders, greased with oil. Work was done under the cover of night. By day, the Byzantines saw nothing. But at night, the ground groaned, the forests whispered. The Ottoman army made the night its ally. That kind of discipline, that kind of patience, only comes from those who've mastered themselves. As Marcus Aurelius put it, patience is the ability to live in harmony with yourself and with nature. And then, one morning, a sound of shock echoed from the walls of Constantinople. The Byzantines stared in disbelief. Because the Ottoman ships had appeared in the Golden Horn, they had crossed land and taken the sea. The great chain meant to seal the harbor, now useless. The Ottomans had become masters of the waters against all odds. With that move, Mehmet didn't just break a physical barrier. He won the psychological war. As fear crept into the hearts of the Byzantines, a new belief spread among their officers. You can't stop a mind like this. Supplies were already running low. Now morale was gone too. Moving ships over land had been attempted before, but never like this. Not on this scale, not with this impact, not with this result. And that's why the young sultan earned the name Fatih, the Conqueror. He wasn't just breaking through walls, he was breaking through minds. Now we dive deeper into the tactics Fatih used at the gates of the city. Was it the thunder of cannons, the breath of patience, or the shadow of waiting that truly conquered Istanbul? When the cannons fell silent, the city still stood. Time itself felt as heavy as the stones crashing into the walls. Nights grew longer. Mornings refused to arrive. Inside his tent, Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror stared at his map. But his eyes weren't on the city. They were fixed on the battlefield within himself. The thicker the walls of Constantinople, the deeper his patience had grown. Because this wasn't just a battle of bodies. It was a war of mind and will. The siege had lasted 53 days. Arrows had flown, tunnels had been dug, cannons had thundered. And still, the city held. Every day his commanders whispered the same doubts into his ear. We should give up. These walls are impossible. Time's not on our side. The army's exhausted. Let's retreat before European reinforcements arrive. Mehmed listened, but he never surrendered, because like a true Stoic, he knew resisting fate is pointless. What matters is accepting what is and doing everything within your power. And so, on the day he made his greatest decision, no swords were drawn. Instead of attacking the walls, he chose to dig beneath them. As the earth was carved with tunnels, he wasn't just breaking through stone, he was sculpting his own patience. At night, he was like an architect sketching with his hands, not to destroy, but to open, to pass through, to reach. During this test of endurance, it wasn't just Byzantium that challenged him. His own army did. Morale slipped. Tensions rose between commanders. But Fatih repeated one quiet line. Waiting is a kind of victory. He who doesn't miss the right moment rules time itself. This was one of those moments when a leader rules not with his heart, but with his mind. And finally, the tunnels dug by Gedik Ahmet Pasha reached the inner walls. Byzantine defenses began to crack. Fatih was no longer conquering from above. He was claiming the city from below. By the 53rd day, patience and reason had done their part. Now came the moment to strike, the right move, at the right place, at the right time. That morning the cannons roared again. But this time the city was not ready. When Istanbul's fate changed, so did Mehmed's. His destiny was fulfilled. And he would later sum up his triumph with one quiet truth. Those who have wisdom know how to wait, and before the patient no wall can stand. But just beyond the gates of Istanbul, a new trial was beginning. Even in the euphoria of victory, could he master his own ego and hold his army to discipline? The sweetest moment of victory for most is when limits disappear and desires are unleashed. But for Mehmed, that moment marked the true beginning of the real battle. The city had fallen. The walls had been breached. All eyes turned to celebration. But he chose to tame the storm inside. This decision was a living reflection of a core Stoic principle. We don't control external events. We control how we respond to them. Instead of getting swept away by the thrill of conquest, he stayed calm, grounded, and rational. That was real virtue. His decision to stop his army from looting the city was perhaps the clearest display of his discipline and self-mastery. The hunger that comes with victory, greed, recklessness, indulgence, often leads to the greatest downfall. But Mehmed stood firm, echoing the spirit of Epictetus. A man's strength lies in his ability to control himself. He wasn't just battling an enemy. He was fighting the unrest inside his own ranks. Keeping his army in check was as much a test as breaching the walls of Constantinople. Because true Stoicism teaches, inner victory is just as vital as outer success. As Marcus Aurelius said, a man's true power is not in his passions but in his reason. Mehmed embodied that power. He didn't give in to rage, greed, or chaos. For him, the real conquest was self-control. He called on himself and his army to choose restraint, discipline, and virtue. With this stance, Mehmed proved he wasn't just a military leader. He became a living example of Stoic values. His inner discipline rippled through his troops. Seeing their leader composed and centered, they followed suit. And that unity didn't just conquer a city, it conquered the human spirit. Because Stoicism teaches, the greatest victory is the one you win against yourself. By preventing looting, Mehmed became a symbol of patience, self-restraint, and moral discipline. This wasn't just about physical control, it was about building a society governed by virtue. Everyone knew, if that balance broke, victory could turn into catastrophe in an instant. That's why Mehmed's restraint remains one of the brightest reflections of Stoic philosophy in action. And it leaves us with a message of our own. If we want our external victories to last, we must first calm the storm within. Don't follow your impulses. Lead with reason and virtue. Because real triumph isn't about defeating others. It's about mastering the wild parts of yourself. And now, with discipline established and his inner war won, Mehmed stands at the heart of Istanbul, at the gates of Hagia Sophia. Not as a conqueror driven by rage, but as a leader guided by principle. After the conquest of Istanbul, one of Sultan Mehmed's most significant decisions was to turn Hagia Sophia into a mosque. This wasn't just a religious act. It was the symbolic beginning of a new civilization and a new era. But even in this historic moment, Mehmed proved he wasn't a leader blinded by victory. His mind and heart were focused on one thing: responsibility, handled with calm. As he stood before Hagia Sophia's grand doors, the unwavering stillness within him mirrored the core of Stoic philosophy. Victory for him wasn't a moment for rage or inflated pride. As Marcus Aurelius once said, anger is a poison to the mind. And Mehmed lived those words. He kept his anger in check. He knew true leadership isn't about ruling with emotion, but with principle. History has seen many leaders lose control after a victory. But Mehmed stayed grounded and fulfilled his duty. By transforming Hagia Sophia into a mosque, he wasn't just making a religious move. He was signaling the birth of a cultural synthesis, the dawn of something new. It showed he was not just a warrior, but a statesman. In Stoicism, doing what's right without being swayed by emotion is the highest virtue. As Epictetus put it, external events are beyond our control, our reactions are not. And Mehmed, with this clarity, chose not vengeance, not destruction, but a step that would echo through history. His calm wasn't just a political tactic, it was a sign of inner maturity. When he opened the doors of Hagia Sophia, he did so not as a man driven by impulse, but as a man led by reason and principle. His choices marked the start of not just military dominance, but cultural and societal transformation. And that too was a reflection of his Stoic posture. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was something far greater. Because true leadership is resisting the intoxication of power. And that's only possible through self-discipline and virtue. Mehmed showed that virtue clearly. He didn't just carve out a place in history as a conqueror, but also as a thinker. His steady and principled approach is a timeless lesson for leaders everywhere. No matter the age, real power and respect are earned not through anger or ego, but through reason and principle. That's why his decision about Hagia Sophia isn't just a milestone in history. It's a moment when Stoic philosophy came to life, and from that moment we learn. Rule not with rage, but with principle. That is the highest form of virtue. By opening the doors of Hagia Sophia with wisdom, Mehmed laid his sword aside and stepped forward as a leader guided by knowledge. Because real strength lies in the depth of the mind. Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror wasn't just a leader who wanted to make history with his sword. He wanted to shape it with his mind, too. In his vision, building a civilization with reason and knowledge was just as important as winning battles on the field. That's why, after the conquest, he chose to highlight his intellectual side just as much as his warrior identity. His multilingual skills, curiosity for different cultures, and deep interest in philosophy were the real sources of his strength. This attitude perfectly reflected the Stoic idea that true power comes from the mind. Because Stoics believed that real virtue and leadership weren't about brute force, but about wisdom and intellect. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The mind is a man's greatest treasure," and Mehmed truly lived by that. He was just as strategic and calm in his palace as he was on the battlefield. So he put great value on education, learned many languages, and respected the wisdom of other cultures. But Mehmed's intellectual side wasn't just about gathering knowledge. He turned that wisdom into real decisions in governance. During his reign, his court was full of philosophers, scientists, and artists. This diversity made Istanbul not just a military hub, but also a center of culture and learning. He knew the power of knowledge and used it to strengthen the empire. That approach aligned with Epictetus' words, "Wisdom is the greatest power." When faced with difficulties, Mehmed didn't give in to anger. He chose to arm himself with knowledge and act with maturity. This showed he lived by Stoic virtues like wisdom and patience. Because Stoicism teaches that real strength isn't emotional, it's rational, rooted in knowledge. His ability to speak multiple languages was also a big part of that wise leadership. He wasn't just ruling lands, he was ruling people from different cultures. So learning their languages wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. And that built a leadership model based on understanding and mutual respect. This reflected the Stoic idea of seeing oneself as a citizen of the world. In the end, Mehmed's choice to be a wise leader fully matched the Stoic belief that power comes from the mind. Because of that, he's remembered not just as a warrior sultan, but as a ruler whose wisdom left a mark on history. Because true power doesn't just lie in the sword, it lies deep in the mind. And as Mehmed grew into this wise leader, he stopped trying to impose only what he knew, and started discovering the strength of listening to other voices and making decisions together. Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror knew very well that a great leader doesn't just move forward with his own knowledge. He also needs to listen to the wisdom around him. His approach to leadership was far from arrogant or the kind that says, "I know best." On the contrary, he led his empire with an open mind, valuing the input of his advisors. This attitude was one of the key foundations of his true wisdom and maturity. In Stoicism, wisdom isn't just about gathering knowledge, it's also about listening and understanding. Epictetus once said, "Wisdom is knowing how to listen," and that sums up Mehmed's leadership perfectly. A true leader doesn't just push his own ideas, he listens to others and finds the best path forward. Mehmed understood this deeply, and he actively sought out different perspectives and learned from those around him. At the time, his court included advisors from many different cultures and fields. He listened not only to military strategists, but also to philosophers and scientists. This diversity didn't just give him more options, it added depth and balance to his leadership. To him, every opinion was like a hidden gem worth exploring, because he knew that no one person can see everything clearly. Thinking together is how you find the best answer. That mindset was also a reflection of the humility Stoics admired so much. Wisdom grows not from pride, but from humility. Mehmed didn't act like he knew everything. He listened to those who did. That's why he wasn't just a warrior or a ruler, he was a truly wise leader. For him, power didn't just lie in the sword, but in thinking together. His open communication with his advisors became one of the key forces that held the state together. Instead of making decisions alone in times of crisis, he gathered different opinions. That reduced mistakes and increased the chances of success. In this way, the Ottoman Empire grew strong not just through force, but through smart, thoughtful leadership. His way of leading is still a universal lesson today. No matter how strong we are, we can't know everything on our own. Real wisdom comes from listening to others and growing through different ideas. Sultan Mehmed's life proves that. Wisdom is knowing how to listen. And that's why he's remembered not just as a conqueror, but as a wise man whose example has lasted for centuries. Because his strength wasn't only on the battlefield. It was in the ideas he listened to and the minds he trusted. Behind every great decision was a shared wisdom born from many voices. Fatih's humble and thoughtful leadership is what made him one of history's greatest rulers. Even today, anyone thinking about leadership can learn from this side of him. Because real power grows when we're able to hear others and learn from them. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. He was a fair leader who acted with reason and respected others' ideas. But Sultan Mehmed was now facing one of his toughest tests, being able to judge even those closest to him with true justice, free from personal emotion. Sultan Mehmed's sense of justice became most clear and most controversial through one of his harshest decisions, not hesitating to sacrifice his own brothers for the sake of the throne and the survival of the state. On the surface, this seems cold-blooded and brutal, but in reality it was the embodiment of a deep Stoic principle. Mehmed had the courage to make the hardest choice, not as a slave to his emotions, but as a guardian of order and continuity. Stoics taught that a virtuous person puts reason and principle above personal ties and feelings. As Epictetus said, loving someone doesn't mean protecting them when they don't do what's right. That quote is key to understanding Mehmed's darker decisions. For him, brotherly love didn't mean turning a blind eye to threats that could destroy the state. Real justice meant standing by what's right, even if it meant standing against someone you love. This stance marked a turning point among the sultans of his time. While fratricide was already present in succession struggles, Mehmed turned it into a conscious state policy. It wasn't about punishing or refusing to forgive a person. It was about putting emotions aside and staying loyal to principle for the sake of the empire. No one, not even family, was above the scale of justice in his eyes. That kind of resolve made Mehmed not just a warrior or a conqueror, but also a thinker, and in many ways, a true Stoic. Because he understood that leadership isn't just about winning battles. It's about being able to make the most painful decisions when needed. And the hardest of all is staying true to justice, even when it's your loved ones on the other side. Even today, his example makes us rethink what it means to act with virtue. True leadership means not being a prisoner to feelings or loyalty, but having the courage to choose what's right when it matters most. Mehmed's refusal to spare his brothers wasn't an act of destruction for him. It was a protective move to strengthen the state and prevent chaos. In that sense, his decision fully aligned with the spirit of Stoicism. In the end, this part of Mehmed's legacy shows us how important it is to place virtue and justice above personal bonds. To him, a truly virtuous man is someone who defends the truth despite his emotions. Someone who can face the most painful realities head-on. That became one of the most defining strengths of his rule. But maybe the most striking part of his Stoic stance was hidden in how he faced death itself. In the final days of his life, Sultan Mehmed was gravely ill. His body had weakened, his face was pale. Even standing upright was a struggle. And yet he began preparing for one last campaign. Where he was going, or whom he planned to face, remains a mystery. But that's not the real point. What truly matters is this: even in that condition, he never abandoned his duty. Some historians call it the stubbornness of a strong leader. Others see it as the last effort of a ruler unwilling to accept death. But through a Stoic lens, there's something much deeper. Do your duty. Wait for death to come. That's what Marcus Aurelius said, and that's exactly what Mehmed did. He didn't give in to fear. He didn't run from the inevitable. He walked alongside death and fulfilled his responsibilities until his very last breath. That attitude leaves a mark not just on the pages of history, but on the human heart. Because deep down, we all know this is how life should be lived. You can be sick, you can be tired, you can feel broken inside, but still do your duty. That's why Mehmed's final campaign represents more than a military action. It was a victory, not over enemies, but over his own body and fate. Because for the Stoics, real success isn't measured by what you achieve in the world. It's measured by the battle you win within yourself. Mehmed's death may have been the end of a ruler, but it was also the perfect example of how a Stoic says goodbye to life. Silently, steadily, having fulfilled his duty, ready to leave. Today, as modern people, we fight our own inner wars, with uncertainty, fear, exhaustion. But what we must remember is this: just because something is hard doesn't mean it's pointless. If Mehmed, sick and frail, could still march forward, we too can get out of bed even when we're tired. We can treat loved ones kindly even when our minds feel foggy. We can keep our shoulders straight even when life feels heavy, because we too have duties. And then, we wait for death to come, just like a Stoic, just like Marcus Aurelius said, just like Sultan Mehmed did. Thank you for watching.